Everybody, today my lecture 9 from form theory in ferment, Plato's Phaedo. This picture means Greek slaves. Lecture 9, form theory in ferment, Plato's Phaedo. Phaedo of Elis was a Greek philosopher, a native of Elis. He was captured in the war as a boy and sold into slavery. He subsequently came into contact with Socrates at Athens, who warmly received him and had him freed. He was present at the death of the Socrates, and Plato named one of his dialogue Phaedo, Wikipedia. Plato's mature dialogue Phaedo describes the immortality of soul, the recollection theory as epistemology, form theory as ontology, and philosophy as a preparation for death. Socrates, as the protagonist of the dialogue, seemed to be the fittest model of all these tales of philosophy. Socrates' life was work, and words actually correspond to the immortality of soul. Socrates tried to understand the nature of virtues, but to no avail. However, his student, the great Plato, at last come to postulate the essence of virtues, that is, forms of virtues. On the basis of the existence of forms, Plato was able to formulate a system of metaphysics, further to lay the foundation of the nation of a philosopher king, republic. Look at the diagram. Republic vs. Phaedo, change and development of form theory by Plato. Here, good itself, beauty itself, justice itself. Expansion of form world. Phaedo, good itself, beauty itself, justice. Numbers 1, 2, odd number, even number, largeness, smallness, identity. Plato's form theory is, however, confronted with various difficulties. Above all, the expansion of the number of forms caused grave difficulty. In Republic, there were merely forms of virtues. For example, forms of beauty, good, and justice. In Phaedo, however, the relevant form is expanded to that of the mathematics and the logical predicates. This change of the quantitative form involves, however, a fundamental paradigm shift in the theory of form. In Republic, the form idea, eidos of good, was highly praised, being compared to the sun, which not only furnishes to visibles the power of visibility, but also provides for their generation and growth and nurture. This reality, then, that gives their truth to the object of the knowledge and the power of knowing to the knower, you must say, is the idea of good, and you must conceive it as being the cause of knowledge and of truth insofar as known. From oversaid, we can define the form in the Republic as transcendent, especially the form idea of good was declared as the source of knowledge and truth by Plato. Into this transcendent form world invade the mediocre things like a number, 1, 2, 3, identity, largeness, and smallness, etc. These things don't share the glory of the sun with the form of good. Further, the form of ordinary things are not outside the earthly things. The forms of numbers and the predicates cannot exist over the things, but in the things, they are immanent forms. We see the diagram. Change and development of form theory of Plato, Republic, transcendent form, the theory of participation, superiority of good itself form. Left. Phaedo, immanent form, the theory of causation, leveling of forms, expression of form world. Although Plato doesn't explicitly distinguish between the two kinds of forms, that is, transcendent and immanent forms, we can conclude it from text of the Phaedo. Plato determines above all the function of form as a cause. Beauty itself, good itself, and the correct itself are all determined as a cause. In this sense, they are same. Beauty itself, good itself, and are not superior to correct itself. Forms of any kind are equalized. I'm going to try to explain to you the nature of that cause which I have been studying, and I will revert to those familiar subjects of ours as my point of departure and assume that there are such things as absolute beauty, form, and the good and the greatness and the like. What we can here understand is the fact that the form theory of Plato was widely delivered in ancient Athens, became popular and even controversial in those days. Therefore, he now wants to defend his conviction that the form of beauty and the good existed, which was followed by the immortality of soul. New kind of forms, that is, forms of greatness and smallness, are now added to the kingdom of forms. The forms of numbers are also postulated. You would exclaim loudly that you know no other way by which anything can come into existence than by participating in the proper essence of each thing in which it participates, and therefore you accept no other cause of the existence of two than participation in duality, and the things which are to be two must participate in duality, and whatever is to be one must participate in unity. The number two owes also its existence to the participation in the form of two. The existence of the number enters the kingdom of forms. Number two participates in the duality. Number one in the unity. Mathematical objects have other meaning of being than physical objects. However, Plato puts two things side by side insofar as they partake of their own forms. All kinds of objects have their own forms. Universal doctrine of form come into being while he previously thought of form as a value concept. Another difficulty lies in positing the form as a cause of being. Participation theory of form takes on another aspect of it. Form is considered to be active. In this regard, participating is similar to imitating. Individuals imitate the form. The form of good was transcendent of all earthly things. The form was compared to the sun, which gives knowledge and truth to the object. However, in Phaedo, a new kind of function of form appears. Form causes the individual to emerge according to itself. Form works in the individual. In the terminology of Aristotle, form is now regarded as an efficient cause. These problems will be later solved and systemized by Aristotle. On top of these problems, the adjective of the comparison, for example, great or small, is said to have also their forms. I think that these comparative qualities, however, depend on the subjective act of comparison. The greatness or smallness doesn't take place until we compare two things each other. Therefore, these qualities belong not to the object itself, but to the subject, that is the mind of man. However, Plato could not admit the generation of comparative attributes because he identifies a comparative attitude with the form. Of course, the generation of a form must not be thought of by Plato. Form corresponds to being parmenized, which is immovable, timeless, without birth, growth, and extinction. It has a form, which is in the Middle Age to be taken as essence. There are language expressions or predicates that don't correspond to the object. The objective things are not great or small in themselves. The comparison between two things demands the standpoint of the third, that is, observer or measurer. Socrates is for himself neither big nor small. From the over-mentioned, a tremendous mistake takes place when a comparative expression is considered in isolation in itself. Plato texted, Socrates asked, now if you assent to this, do you not, when you say that Simmias is greater than Socrates and smaller than Phaedo, say that there is in Simmias greatness and smallness? The paradox of the relative predicates turn up again in the later dialogue Parmenides, which I believe to be the work of Aristotle. Aristotle is the author of dialogue Parmenides, which hitherto has been believed as Plato's writing. The third man argument in Parmenides was invented by Aristotle. We can already infer the sprout of the third man argument. According to the over quoted, if Simmias is greater than Socrates and smaller than Phaedo, then there is in Simmias simultaneously greatness and smallness. Plato further distinguished the greatness of Simmias from Simmias in himself. That is, the greatness of Simmias doesn't come from the man Simmias, but from the form of being great. The form is the cause of everything that is. Likewise, the smallness of the Simmias doesn't come from the man Simmias, but from the form of smallness. To each other different forms, that is, greatness and smallness, coexist in one man named Simmias. If we replace the greatness as a form with the greatness as an attribute of a man, we can easily solve the difficulty resulting from the form theory. However, Socrates and Phaedo insist on the form theory. Beautiful things are beautiful because of their participation in the beauty itself. The man Simmias is considered as a medium or a mere receptor of forms, smallness or greatness. That is, the integrity of the man Simmias is not taken into consideration. The argument is somewhat artificial. Furthermore, as over mentioned, the smallness and the greatness are not independent attributes. They come into being only when two things are compared by the third point of view. However, when comparative opposite adjectives are substantiated, are regarded as independent beings, the opposite come into a dialectical process in the meaning of Hegel's phenomenology of spirit. In order to avoid the difficulty of the comparative attributes, Plato supposed the game of repulsion between two forms. One of two things must take place: either it flees or withdraws when it is opposite, smallness, advances toward it, or it has already ceased to exist by the time smallness comes near it. Through the act of repulsion, the opposite forms preserve their own identities. Greatness remains great, smallness remains small. There is no instance of one form colliding with the other. In the case of the height of three persons, Socrates, Simmias, and Phaedo. Phaedo is the tallest, Simmias is the middle, and Socrates is the shortest. Phaedo has only the great itself. Socrates has only the small itself, but Simmias has both greatness and smallness. Greatness and smallness in Simmias come into struggle. Greatness surpasses smallness when Simmias exceeds Socrates in height. On the contrary, smallness expels greatness when Simmias is measured in height with Phaedo. Then Simmias is called small and great when he is between the two, surpassing the smallness of the one by exceeding him in height, and granting to the other the greatness that exceeds his own smallness. I think it is evident not only that greatness itself will never be great and also small, but that the greatness in us will never admit the small or allow itself to be exceeded, but it will not receive any and admit the smallness, thereby becoming other than it was. So I have received and admitted the smallness and am still the same small person I was, but The greatness in me, being great, has not suffered itself to become small. In the same way, the smallest in us will never become or be great, nor will any other opposite, which is still what it is, ever become or be also of its own opposite. Long citation. There is no becoming or changing in the real being, that is the form. In this regard, Plato follows straightly Parmenides' doctrine of being. The difficulties involved in Plato's argument will be later solved through the distinction of substance and attribute in the metaphysics of Aristotle. Today's lecture ends.